Welcome to the Traveling Cup, episode 4.
Welcome to the Traveling Cup podcast, connecting you to coffee-loving entrepreneurs, writers, and think tanks building a better tomorrow. Now here's your host, Mark William Guay.
Today on the show, I want to talk to you about how to go about finding your genius. Not just your passion, but your genius that will not only help you change the world, but will also help you make the impact that you want to be. Many of you already know of Jeff Goins, one of the leading thought leaders on how we can use writing as a vehicle to reach an audience, exchange ideas, and in doing so, create a better world. I asked him to come on the show, and I can't believe he said yes. I'm so excited. I'm so happy to be able to share his story so that you can better learn how you can jump into the life you want to live. The one that makes you feel like you can't wait to wake up and continue your purpose. The one where work becomes synonymous with purpose, where genius and purpose intersect. So let's get right into it. This episode is brought to you by Climbing Fish, a group of connectors based in New York City that are dedicated to reconnecting people through conversations that matter, and in doing so, helping you find your true genius. Find out more at climbingfish.com. All right, ladies and gentlemen, so grab your morning favorite brew and get ready for a real literary treat. Today on the show, I have with me a superstar in the writing field, Jeff Goins. Am I pronouncing that correct, Jeff?
Yeah. Goins like coins, but with a G.
Excellent. Jeff Goins is a freelance writer, a nonprofit marketer, and founder of Rect.org, an online magazine and community for spiritual misfits. I love that word. What I love about Jeff is that he always seems to find a clever way to share stories that tug at the heart, and he gets readers to create real, meaningful action. So much so that actually just this morning, Jeff, I stopped in the middle of my morning run to stop and reflect on a story that you shared in another podcast I listened to. Jeff focuses on writing, ideas, and making a difference, which is why I am so excited to have him on the Traveling Cup, the place where we learn from entrepreneurs who are making the world a better place. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Jeff Goins to the Traveling Cup podcast. Welcome to the show, Jeff.
Hey, Mark. Good to be with you.
Excellent. So, Jeff, I'm pretty obsessed with coffee, and I like to always share with my listeners what I'm enjoying. So I just got back from San Diego, a nice little vacation that I took, and I'm enjoying a nice cup of coffee from this awesome micro roaster in San Diego called Bird Rock Coffee. So I'm just curious, what's your drink of choice that gets you through the day?
Well, that's a good question. I've got an empty cup of coffee in front of me, so it's really an empty cup of nothing. I mean, there's coffee residue at the bottom. I guess I can't say it's a.
Well, that's exactly.
I drink a lot of French press coffee throughout the day, and I'll have an occasional Coke Zero as well.
All right, fantastic. That's definitely like what I would expect from a writer, an empty cup of coffee. So excellent. All right, Jeff. Well, let's go ahead and let's get right into the questions. So I really love how your emails identify you as Jeff Goins, writer. How did you end up exactly on this path, and what led you to be a writer whose goal is not only to write, but it is to help people?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've been a writer my whole life. I've been writing my whole life, but I only recently, about 3 years ago, began to call myself a writer, which was something that was really uncomfortable for me. And the more writers that I get to know, the more I hear this, that these people are writers, but they don't want to call themselves writers. And that was kind of how I felt. And I think it's because we tend to associate a certain level of legitimacy or professional acumen with that term writer. I mean, I certainly did. I thought you had to be published or, get paid to do it or something. You couldn't just be a writer. And so and at the same time, I felt pretty conflicted about this because I wanted to do this. I wanted to be a writer. I just didn't really know how to begin. And I remember reading in The War of Art, Stephen Pressfield said that if you want to be a writer, you just need to call yourself a writer. And he said that it's really important to turn pro in your head before you do it on paper. And later I did an interview with Steve, and I said, when does a writer when does a writer become a writer? And he said, when you say you are, you become a writer when you say you are. And I said, well, what about everybody else? What if nobody else thinks that you're a writer? He said, screw what everybody else says. You are when you say you are. And there's something really powerful about saying something and then kind of having to believe it because you put yourself out there. And so I started to do this. I started to call myself a writer. And part of the decision for that came from a conversation I had with a friend, as I said, about 3 years ago, where he asked me what my dream was. And I said, I didn't know. And then he said, well, I would have thought your dream was to be a writer. And when he said that, something really struck me. And so I said, well, yeah, I guess you're right. My dream is to be a writer, but that'll never happen. And he said, Jeff, you don't have to want to be a writer. You are a writer. You just need to write. And so, the combination of all this stuff kind of happening around the same time, I decided to start calling myself a writer, and I started putting it everywhere, sort of as like a device to, force me to believe this thing about myself that I kind of suspected was already true. But like a lot of things that we know about ourselves, it was the thing that I didn't want to admit about myself because there would be certain expectations associated with that. But as I began to call myself a writer, it forced me to write, which made me better, and then started to attract attention to what I was doing. And as I started to attract attention, which for me was through a blog that I had started, I realized, man, all these people are paying attention. Maybe I can help some of them, which is something that, working in the nonprofit world for so long is something that I've always been really passionate about.
One thing I absolutely love about that, Jeff, is it goes with what you just did there with, identifying and calling yourself a writer. Really goes with something I also really believe in. And someone, a really close friend of mine, said this to me. He said that you can let life happen. You can go through life and just let life happen, or you can make life happen for you. And so it sounds like when, 3 years ago, when you started calling yourself a writer, you were choosing your path. You were, being active, right? And you were going down that path and saying, I am a writer, and I'm calling myself one, and therefore I am one.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, I would say that I think a calling, a vocation, I think is a combination of something that chooses you and then something that you choose. And I think that when we get lost in life, it's usually due to only doing one of those, where we kind of submit to a career track that we're good at but we're not passionate about, or that pays really well but we don't care about it. uh and so it chooses us but we don't choose it. Or we see people on American Idol or whatever your reality show of choice is, and you see somebody who chooses something but it's just not there, like the talent or the skill isn't there yet, and maybe if they try really hard it could come about. But I think when you see somebody really in their element, there's kind of this beautiful mix of resonance where it's like, well, yeah, of course they are doing that, because what else could they do? It just seems so natural. And yet at the same time we see them working really, really hard, to do it and get better at it. And that's how becoming a writer was for me, where in one sense I felt drawn to it, but on the other hand I knew that I could resist it, and choosing it was an important part of the journey.
So it sounds, because after hearing you saying that, and then following you for a while and reading what you've written, it sounds like what you do is kind of help people find their genius in a way. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I like that idea. This idea that a genius is more of like a spiritual urging inside of you than it is necessarily a really smart person. And I do like that Greek notion that when artists are creating their best work, they're being indwelled by a creative spirit. There's something, regardless of your worldview, I think there's something spiritual and mysterious about the creative process that every artist at some point has to acknowledge.
So Jeff, just curious. Now, my background is as an English teacher, so I've taught writing, and I also write on the side, and I've teach what other people have written, and so I'm curious, what does it feel like to call yourself a writer, and how has your definition of writer changed for the 21st century?
Well, so what does it feel like to call yourself a writer? Well, at first it feels really scary. And I would say it always feels scary because depending on whom you're with, that tends to have different connotations, you
Right.
know? And so when you tell your family you're a writer, I mean, this is something that I did kind of audaciously. I was still working for a nonprofit organization. I was still, you know, my life, my outward life hadn't changed at all. And yet my first association was with being a writer, where
Hmm.
people would ask me, "What are you?" And I never really had a good explanation for it because I was sort of a marketer guy, and I just
Hmm.
didn't know what to call myself. So when you call yourself a writer around your family, sometimes that can sort of cause dismissive glares or
Hmm.
oh here he's gonna mortgage his life away or something. But I think it's always scary because if you're leaving a comfortable life, it people think you're crazy because there's
Right.
not this long precedence of success of all the writers that have come before you. I mean,
Hmm.
we tend to associate uh, you know alcoholism and
Hmm.
compulsive behavior with what it means to be a writer.
Right.
And then I find that, as you tend to hang out with more writers, um, you inevitably start hanging around people that are better than you, and you know it. And I'm scared to call myself a writer around, friends of mine that are contributing to the New York Times or the New Yorker
Hmm.
or are just on seemingly a whole other level. So I think it's always scary because you feel like you're kind of in between who you once were, but you're not yet quite to maybe the ideal standard that people would associate with the moniker writer, which is like what, Hemingway or something. So until you're Hemingway, you're a failure.
Hmm.
um and how has it changed in the 21st century? I think is a great question, and I think it's I'll attempt to answer that. I don't really know, other than I think that um, now that we have the internet and that literally anybody and everybody can and often is a writer by even just contributing to their Facebook status or
Hmm.
Twitter account or one of the uh, tens of millions of blogs out there. um, I think that everybody, can in some sense call themselves a writer. And I think maybe some elitists would say that's a really bad thing. I think it's a really great thing. I think, writing is one of those things that anybody can do and everybody should learn to do well. And so I think what it means to be a writer now is what it's always meant in one sense, which is a writer's just somebody who writes. I mean, I like how I heard Anne Lamott respond to this question once recently, where somebody said, you know, uh, so something along the lines of the same thing I said to Steve Pressfield, where they said, when can I become a writer, or I'm worried that I'm not a good writer, and just said, a writer is somebody who writes, so write,
Hmm.
and then get good.
Right.
And I like this idea that there's nothing audacious necessarily about calling yourself a writer. It just means that you are one who writes. And in this day and age, that does mean that you're probably going to use the internet. That
Hmm.
you'd be sort of foolish not to. It's a great way to instantly connect with people and share your words with the world. And now, with when everybody can be a writer, I do think that it is upon us who take the craft seriously to spend our time getting good.
So, first of all, I love how you bring up Anne Lamott. I mean, and I love in Bird by Bird, and she talks about that everyone needs to start with what she calls, a shitty first draft, right?
Right.
And then and then eventually you make that in your craft, and you become like, you said, you become Hemingway material. So, do you see the role of a writer now, especially one in the 21st century, as being someone who's not only skilled with the word, but also skilled with making high quality video and pictures as well, like you do on your blog?
Well, I certainly wouldn't impose that on anybody.
Hmm.
I think that if you're a writer, that at some point you need to consider what I think are kind of the three essential uh, disciplines of being a professional writer, and I take these very seriously. And that is, at any given time, I am trying to build my craft. I'm trying to get better at what I do. I'm trying to build a brand, a stronger brand, through my website and through speaking engagements, and any way that I can get the word out about my content. And I would say having high quality video and well designed website for the audience that I'm interacting with is essential to that. And then the last thing I'm doing is I'm trying to build a business, not necessarily because I care that much about the bottom line, but because money for me is a means of continuing to do the work. Like Walt Disney said, we don't make movies to make money; we make money so that we can make more movies.
Right, right.
So, do you have to be a great video editor or a podcaster or even a blogger to be a writer in the 21st century? No, no, you don't have to. But, these are the tools that are available to us, not just to craft sentences, but really to share a message. And I certainly see myself as a writer, but I also see myself as a communicator. And I know as a reader, as an audience member, when I see a great message that is poorly bundled in an ugly website or just a bad medium, I tend to interpret that message through the lens that I'm experiencing that medium, which is to say, if you've got a really great book and it's got a bad cover, I'm judging that,
Right.
and if you're a really good writer and you have an ugly website with stock photos with water marks on them or something, I'm gonna go, like, they didn't even take the time to pick out a nice photo. What is going to like, how can I believe that they took the time to proofread their content, which I know isn't necessarily fair, but I still think it, and so do a lot of readers. And so for me, those are ways of serving the reader to get the message across.
Wow, what a great answer. I mean, that is absolutely true. And yeah, it might not be like you said, the nicest way of looking at it, but that is very well the truth of it. And so don't judge a book by its cover. Well, I mean, the cover a lot of times is what will grab your attention. And if, like you said, if it's a poor cover, that's a metaphor for what perhaps the person behind it is. So that's great.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. So I'm just curious, what have been some of the most influential writers for you?
Yeah, I mean that's always a hard question because depending on season of life, it depends. The writers that I keep going back to are Hemingway, C.S. Lewis. There's some contemporary writers that I really enjoy. I read a lot of business books. I like Seth Godin. I do like. I mentioned Stephen Pressfield. His nonfiction about writing, I think, is great. Those are a few that I read pretty regularly.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, I also I love I teach Hemingway, but I also love Seth Godin. Talk about not just a good writer. That man can present. I just saw him speak in Boston, and he blew me away. He was very, very, very engaging.
Yeah, he's great. He's kind of like Hemingway in the sense that he can say a lot with very little.
Exactly. So, just curious, what books are you reading right now?
This is a question that everybody asks me, and I'm always like, oh, "What am I reading?"
Could be blogs as well.
Yeah, no, I've been listening to a lot of audiobooks. As a dad, I find I have less, I don't have hours every day to sit on the couch and read as I used to, but I'm always running around doing something, even if I'm just driving somewhere. So I have been listening to this tome of a book by David McCullough, John Adams, a great book about one of the American founding fathers, but it's like 1,000 pages, taken forever. I just finished up my second reading of The Great Gatsby this year. So that's, great. It's a classic. And I'm also in the middle of Huck Finn, which has just been fun to read.
The Great Gatsby. It seems a lot of people are reading that these days. I'm not sure if
it's that movie came out.
I know.
Yeah.
I reread it too, and I was thinking about the green light for a while, so I completely understand.
Right. Yep.
All right, so let's get into the new age here, and so I have a couple listener questions that came in that I want to throw your way and see what you have for those. So, as you call yourself a social media junkie, Do you think it's a big time waster? And maybe you could share with our listeners here, how did you kick the habit so you could focus more on your creative work?
Well, kick the habit, man. That sounds like I'm on the other side of recovery or something. Uh, I am not. I feel like showing up at an AA meeting. I'm 20 years sober, and I would still call myself an addict. Um, yeah. So social media, I think, is a bit of a distraction. It's a hard thing for me because without social media, I probably wouldn't be writing and publishing books. So I owe a lot to this great tool. And at the same time, it is the thing that can both enrich me and kill my craft.
Hmm.
It's the thing that causes a message to spread, but also trains me to have a shorter and shorter attention span. So I am constantly battling this thing that I think every writer battles, which is this tug between the urgent and the important. And it's
Right.
whether it's email or calling up a friend or cleaning the house, whatever it is, your urgent distraction of the
Hmm.
day versus the important work of writing your manuscript that nobody's going to read for 6 months. There's always that tug and that tension, and social media happens to be the easy urgent thing for me to go to. And so the way that I manage that tension is usually through scheduling, through using tools like Buffer that allow me to write a bunch of updates and then just kind of plug them in and let those messages get dripped out on Twitter or Facebook, every day or every few hours, whatever the frequency is,
Hmm.
so that I don't have to go back and constantly check it or update it every time I get a new thought. I just, whenever I get an idea, I drop it in there and then I let it do its thing. And there are still times when I check it way too much. But using tools like that, I think have helped me go, okay, that's handled. Now I'm gonna focus on this. And the other thing I do, that's not particularly novel, but certainly helps me, is I just when I need to write, I get up at an ungodly hour when nobody I know is conscious, much less on social media. And that I go, well, there's nobody's on Twitter right now, at least not that speaks English. And so and so I'm gonna write, because what else am I gonna do at 4:30 in the morning?
Right, right. It's funny though because I'm thinking that for me with social media, and I would like to hear what you think of this. It's so tough to tell whether I'm being productive with using social media to help market, or I'm just procrastinating.
Yeah, and that's why I have those like three disciplines that I talked about earlier. Build the craft, build the brand, build the business.
Hmm.
If I'm not doing something uh, every day, to kind of fill each of those buckets, like if I've just spent all day on Twitter, and I haven't really written anything, but I checked email, I did all these things that felt productive, but all I did was build the brand and maybe even build it kind of poorly. I go, dude, you're not doing your job. Like your job is to keep the money coming in so that you can keep doing this. Your job is to keep growing the brand so that more people can find out about you. And it's to actually write and improve your craft, because if you don't, it's going to stagnate and people aren't going to want to keep reading you. And so for me, those three habits, disciplines work together to provide this well-rounded thing, and I get that justification. And so I think it's really just a matter of, okay, if I did this, maybe I did it obsessively and I overdid it, but
Hmm.
if I did it, I can check that, and now I need to go do these other two things.
Right, right. Okay. So, all right, let's go on. So, the next question actually comes from one of our listeners, Leanne, and you can follow her at Soul Words, SOWULWORDS, Soul Words. And she asks, you've written, Jeff, that you should let your brand choose you instead of the other way around. Are you satisfied with the result? And do you sometimes wish you can go back and rebrand yourself? Does having a brand box you into writing, or does it give you inspiration?
Yes.
That's
Yeah, it does. And
a hard
man,
question. So
that's a great question. And I mean, to be totally honest, yeah, sometimes it feels boxed in, and other times it's like, wow, I'm so glad that I have this box, this canvas on which to create, because if I didn't, I would be experiencing that paralysis that a lot of writers experience, where you can't do anything and therefore you do nothing. And so I'm constantly struggling with this brand that in some ways I think I've chosen, in other ways I think I've earned, and in some ways has been given to me. And I'm like, yeah, 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 but I'm so much more than that.
Mm-hmm.
Case in point, I became known as this blogger who writes about writing, and I have intentionally tried to kind of push the extremes of that by writing books that aren't about writing, that are written but aren't just about this topic. Because at some point it becomes circular for me, and I never want to be a writer who isn't actually going out into the real world and doing real writerly things. I'm happy to talk about them on my blog, but I also have to be out in the market, doing it the real way that the rest of the world is doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I experienced that a lot. If I could go back and rebrand myself, would I? I don't know, maybe. But if I did, would I be experiencing these same
Right,
tensions and
right.
and issues? Yeah, absolutely. I think it's something that every artist struggles with, whether you're a painter or sculptor or whatever. At a certain point, somebody labels you as something, because it's just easier
Mm-hmm.
for us to compartmentalize people in our brains that way, and then you feel like you're kind of bucking against this label. And I think that's part of art. I think part of art is pushing boundaries, but at the same time honoring the fact that they're there, and that those restrictions in some mysterious way do help the creative process. And I try to recognize that in my frustration, that without these boundaries, I would probably be paralyzed.
Right, right. And two, I mean, the thing about boundaries, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. They help you they help your niche identify with you, right? It helps you kind of fit into your niche.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, we were just talking about Seth Godin. I think he's a great example of this. He found an audience, kind of talking about business and marketing, but now that he's established his voice and, for the most part, established probably his core audience, what he would call his tribe, he can kind of get away with whatever he wants.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, the form in which he writes, short, punchy prose, is pretty I mean, it's pretty consistent, and yet the topic varies from public education to economics, to most recently his book about art.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do think that without those boundaries he wouldn't have that freedom, because he'd be writing about all these different things, but there wouldn't be this thread, this worldview woven through all of it. And therefore he'd probably be irrelevant, because we'd be like, well, is he an art writer, or is he a this thing, or is he an
Mm-hmm.
economist? And yeah, I do think establishing that niche in some way um, uh, allows people to associate with you, and then they do give, once you earn their trust, they kind of give you permission to do whatever you want. Diehard Quentin Tarantino films will watch a movie about vampires, or the Wild West, or what have you, and Tarantino knows that.
Mm-hmm. So going off with what you were just saying with Seth Godin and how he's now able to, talk about different topics if he wants because he's already established the tribe. Um, how do you go ahead and balance, as you call it, slowing down in life without pushing ahead and constantly moving on to the next thing?
Well, I think there's a difference between slowing down and stagnating, which is
Mm-hmm.
a fear of mine, and it's a fear of a lot of people. And my recent book, The In Between, is
Right.
is this exploration of this struggle that I experience as somebody who needs to accomplish things to feel some sense of self worth. The way that I'm balancing that now is there's a difference between slowing down and stopping. Stopping, standing still, that's not a good thing. That's, you're not moving anywhere. But like if you're going to drive through the wine country, you want to take your time going through an area with beautiful vistas like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so the point of the in between is to enjoy the journey. And so for me, it's not so much about going slower than I want. It's instead about maybe doing one thing instead of doing 50, and doing that one thing really, really well. Or while I'm creeping through a project, and it feels slower than I would like it to go because I want to move on to the next thing. I'm gonna relish it and I'm gonna enjoy it and I'm gonna do the work as best I can. And it is unnerving for somebody who wants to produce a lot of stuff, but I am finding this is leading to better work. It's giving me a greater peace of mind. And I'm actually still as productive as I was before. And I have a task list of 10 things to do, and instead of trying to do all 10 at once, I take them one at a time. I move through that list pretty quickly because I'm fully present to each task instead of distracted because I'm doing one thing in front of me and three things behind me. So I'm beginning to reject the notion that more is better.
All right. So you know what? You brought it up, and I'm so happy that you brought up the in between. Okay. Because let's talk about that for a little bit. I really think that a lot of the listeners to the Traveling Cup find themselves in the in between. They're in between what they exactly want to do, the genius that they think they can be or that they want to be, but they're stuck in whatever job it is that they're doing, whether it's for money or because they followed their advice of their parents or something along those lines. And so let me bring up a quick point. One of your current posts really reminds me of David Foster Wallace's speech called "This Is Water." I'm not sure if you've seen that,
Yeah,
listened to
that's
it,
right.
or there's a great video of it out there for our listeners who want to check it out. Just Google "This Is Water." And so, for our listeners who don't know it, the idea is that many 30-year-old somethings they find themselves stuck in the grocery store checkout line with the realization that they are unhappy, even though they followed all the right advice. They went to school, they got the good job, they work hard, long hours. And so, is this kind of who you're talking to when you're talking about the in between? And maybe you could just share with us some tips that you get from that.
Yeah, that's a great video. I just watched it the other day just because I had forgotten how good it was. Um,
It's so powerful.
yeah, it really is. And so, yeah, I think it's this idea that we start our lives, our adult lives as 18-year-old idiots with this expectation that life is going to be some kind of grand adventure. And then when we get to the humdrum, we go, this is it? Like, I thought it would be more. I thought this would be better. And I just read on a trip a few months ago, The Sun Also Rises. And I think this really speaks to that same idea that, yeah, you can end up in your 30s and you sort of have inherited this life that you didn't feel like you signed up for. And I talked to writers, creatives, artists, all these people who wanted their lives to look a certain way, and in some ways, because it happens to all of us, life kind of happened to them. They had a family, they got promoted to a certain level in their career that it's hard to walk away from, whatever. But they sort of feel trapped, and there's certainly a group of people, a school of thought that says, forget all that and go chase your dreams. But I love this idea. Wallace talks about it, and even Hemingway talks about it. And The Sun Also Rises, albeit it's a little bit implicitly. But it's basically this idea that this grand adventure that you've been waiting for, if you rush through where you are right now, if you use the end as a justification for the means, meaning it doesn't matter who you walk over, who you flip off, driving down the highway, or whom you take advantage of on your way to the top. As long as you get to this life that you imagined for yourself, you will never be happy, and you will never live a meaningful life, because what I argue in the in between is that the best moments are the ones happening right now. So whether they're high moments or low moments, if you cannot have that attitude about where you are right now, when you get to a quote unquote better place, you won't be able to recognize it as such, because you will have created this habit in yourself of waiting for the next big thing. And once you get to the next big thing, it's never quite as big as you'd like it to be. As an entrepreneur once told a friend, where the friend said, how much is enough? How much money, how much stuff, how much is enough? And he said, just a little bit more. And that's sort of our mentality, especially I think in maybe the first few chapters of adulthood. Just want a little bit more. We want things to go just a little bit faster. And I have found that there is this inexplicable joy and sometimes a quiet satisfaction in relishing the seemingly ordinary moments. And I love that line in The Sun Also Rises where one of the ladies says to one of the guys, you can't. Well, actually, Jake says it to his friend Robert, who wants to go to South America. He says, "You can't run away from yourself by moving around. I've tried it before." And I've tried that too, and it's true. You go on a trip, you go on vacation, you start a new job with this idea that this is going to be better. And you take a part of yourself into that new situation, and it just turns into the life that you were trying to escape. Because I think we begin to realize as we go through life that maybe some of this conflict is internal, not external. Maybe this search for meaning is something that has to happen inside, that necessarily has to happen outside.
It's I forgot who it was who said this, and you're making me think of them, where they said that they were in this kind of searching thing too, and they went to the four corners of the world to find out that all they had to do was look inside.
Yeah, I mean, lots of travelogues, sort of end this way. I was thinking of what was that book that got turned into a movie about
Into the Wild?
Yeah, Into the Wild.
Chris
So I mean,
McCandless, yeah.
yeah, so he ends his life basically saying, "I'm alone in the middle of nowhere, and now I realize all I really wanted was friends."
Right. Oh, that's so sad.
It's super sad. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's this idea that I'm searching for something, and yet the thing that I'm looking for, maybe the key to it in some way, is inside of me. And
Right.
and that video, This Is Water, is, look, like, you can't control where you are right now, but you can control who you are right now. And maybe that's what it really takes to be happy. Maybe that's what it really takes to make a difference. And I've got to tell you, like, I'm starting to see my dreams come true, and it's really exciting, and it's yet not completely satisfying, where I go, yeah, but I want a little bit more. And if I can't be content here, how am I going to be content then, wherever and whenever then happens to be?
All right, so let's go on, and I want to hear you talk a little bit more about what your career is like now, and so your career is a bit like being a mentor to a lot of people, right? And so what does that feel like? Being able to do good, but also being able to make a profitable living off of it.
Well, that part's pretty awesome. I mean, it feels like both a pleasure and a privilege. I love getting to do this. I love being able to help people by sharing some of the lessons that I'm learning and struggles that I'm overcoming. And it does feel like a deep honor to be able to offer that to other people and see it change people's lives. At times, I sort of feel, unworthy of it. But I think it's a cool way to make a living, helping people, adding value to their lives, and being able to support my family in the process. And I will tell my audience that, hey, I mean, my wife doesn't have to work, and she can take care of our son because of you. And there's this really cool circle of gratitude where my audience has enabled my family and me to live our dream in many ways. And that makes me grateful. And so that makes me want to give more to them. And that makes them grateful. And that makes them want to, give back to me.
That really is beautiful. I love the way that you put that as well. So for our listeners right now that are driving to work and they really want to enact your advice and really make this happen, they want to be monetarily successful, yet they also want to make the world a better place. Can you offer any sort of advice to them of where they maybe should go next?
Well, I do think, and I'm assuming that a good amount of your readers are probably North American, and I do think that in our culture, and we're not the only ones this way, we do have kind of some weird associations with money.
Mm.
And some of us want it too much, and some of us, think it's evil in and of itself or feel awkward talking about it. And I do think it's okay, it's healthy to see money as a means. I
Mm.
can't really do anything with this paper in my wallet, in and of its, just with itself, but I can use it to get things that are valuable
Hmm.
to me. And if you look at it that way, I think that's a healthy way to look at it. And I love this idea. I think I've started to listen to some of these old like business classic books and audio programs, and I listened to one called The Strangest Secret, which is kind of an interesting idea by Earl Nightingale. But in that, and you can find that on YouTube or something, and
Hmm.
maybe that's your bag, maybe it's not. But I submit to you that one of the things that he said that I think is true is uh, most people want to make money so that they can succeed. And he says a person um, doesn't make money until after he or she has succeeded. Meaning, you have to first go help people before you can get paid for it. And most of us sit around waiting to get paid for something before we're willing to help somebody.
Hmm.
And I have experienced this in a little way, and it's been really exciting. But I think that generosity begets more generosity,
Hmm.
meaning that as I give a gift to the world has a way of giving that back to me. And
Right.
it sounds very simple, but for years I lived my life with sort of a, okay, world, do me a favor. I'm standing out here with my hand out waiting for you to do something for me. And I just got kind of bittered and frustrated. And I think a lot of people approach life that way. And my dad told me this years ago, and I'm just now beginning to understand the truth of it in everything from art to business to relationships. And it's this, little adage that we're all pretty familiar with, but I realize is very true. And it's this: what goes around comes around.
Hmm.
And that, like, that's sort of a karmic statement, but it's absolutely true. And you can put good out there, and I think that good has a way of coming back to you. And I think a practical way to do that is to find ways to help people wherever you're at. And if you're a writer, a great way to do that is to tell other people's stories. They will be grateful to you for the opportunity to share their story, and all of a sudden you've got content that you can
Hmm.
share, and it forces you to practice. And that in and of itself, learning how to tell other people's stories, I think is a great way to start taking these steps towards doing this on a more professional basis. And you will find yourself in the great company of many writers who started out their careers as journalists.
Hmm.
One of which was, as we've been talking about, Hemingway.
It's funny though that you talk about the concept of money as something that either people crave and that's like their main desire, or contrastly, it's something that they're that's evil. And I think it's Dave Ramsey, I think, that said this once, where it's money that allows you to do more good, that allows you to give more, to help more, and to create your craft more. So I love what you're saying there. I think that's beautiful.
Yeah, I think it certainly can be, and I do love that Walt Disney quote. We don't make movies to make money. We make money to
Right,
make
right.
more movies. It can be a means. It can be a fuel for getting your message out to the world.
So, all right, well, let's talk a little bit and focus on productivity. And I like to always end my podcasts with talking about, as Michael Hyatt brings up to light, the idea of a morning ritual.
Mhm.
And I believe you're friends with Michael Hyatt. So I'm curious, can you share a little bit of what exactly is your morning ritual? What does it look like?
Well, it's certainly changed since I've had a son.
Right. Yes.
But but I do find that I do the same things just about every day. And I actually published my morning routine on my blog maybe a year ago, and it has changed a bit since our son's sleeping schedule has changed. But basically, every morning I wake up, and if I want to get some writing done, and I just, life's busy. I'll actually wake up at about 5 o'clock, which is usually an hour and a half before he wakes up. Then I'll get up with him. I'll take care of him, for the next hour and a half, feed him breakfast, that sort of thing. And then we'll start playing. Sometimes he'll get to playing by himself, and maybe I'll, open my laptop and check in on social media. And sometimes that just doesn't happen. But then, so we spend probably 3 hours together. And my wife comes down and takes over. And during that time, or shortly after, every morning I get up, I drink a couple glasses of water, I eat something like eggs, something with a lot of protein in it, just so I'm not hungry like an hour later. As quickly as possible, either before our son wakes up, or after he's off and playing, I will write something, anything. Doesn't have to be for anything in particular. Just the act of getting up and creating kind of gets my creative juices flowing. I also will read something, anything. It might be a magazine, a blog post, a book. I tend to try to keep it analog, because once I open my computer, all kinds of distractions, come into play. At that point, I'll start drinking coffee, and then almost every morning, and definitely every day, I will go for a walk, which has become a very important discipline for me. Not for the sake of exercise. I don't chalk this up as exercise time. This is time to think, and just kind of be inspired, for maybe 15, 20 minutes, just to slow down before the hustle and bustle of my day begins. And on the lucky days, I also take a shower. But in a nutshell, that's my routine. I try to drink a lot of water, eat some protein, play with my son, read something, write something, go for a walk, and then get the day started.
Yeah, that's great. And I actually just started doing the walk thing as well. Not for exercise, but I think Ariana Huffington just put this out, and she wrote a beautiful article that talked about how the great thinkers of all, classical, in Greece, and all the Renaissance thinkers, that was something that they would do. They would just go out for a walk, and that was like something that they not just did on the for fun. They did it scheduled. Like, it was Immanuel Kant did it too, the philosopher. Like, everyone did a walk, because it just allowed them to really just think. Like, that physical movement kind of moved their mind as well. So all right, well, could you talk a little bit about how has this career opened up your schedule? And I know you have a son now, but it seems quite beautiful that you're able to have your work go around your life, a lifestyle business, and work around your son. So has your career, allowed you to see the world more, or perhaps just meet really interesting people?
Yeah, definitely. I will say that one of the things that I did not anticipate was, having all the time in the world to write, and still feeling like I don't have any time to write. And so I will say that it's still very much a discipline for me. This idea that if I want to write, I have to get up at 5 a.m. before my day starts to really do that. Because I've in some ways traded, one group of distractions for another. And I'm really trying to minimize those and control those. But it is kind of interesting how wherever I go, these same kinds of distractions, regardless of my career, tend to follow me, and I still have to wrestle down, down my wrestle down the muse, and force myself to create. It hasn't been any easier. That said, I really am trying to build a business around my lifestyle, not trying to let my life kind of conform around whatever it is I do for a living. But I feel very fortunate to be able to travel, speak, and get to meet readers, and get to meet other people who are doing this. You mentioned Michael Hyatt. I've gotten to meet folks like that who are, many steps ahead of me, and I get to learn from them as I go on this journey. And I would say just having a blog, and doing what I talked about earlier, which is interviewing other people, man, that's been, doing what you're doing right now, Mark, hopefully with more interesting people than myself. It's a great way to meet people, because it's a way to serve, somebody that you respect, and at the same time get to have a great, interesting conversation with them. And I've been, really honored to be able to do that with all kinds of people, including Seth Godin and Tim Ferriss, and Stephen Pressfield, and some really interesting folks who are doing cool stuff in the world.
Right, right. Oh, and I completely agree with you. And Jeff, you are incredibly interesting, and no, and seriously, a great mentor to me and to a whole bunch of other people as well. I think pretty much the people David Foster Wallace was talking to. That's the people that really grab hold of what you're talking about, and I love it. And so you are incredibly interesting, and I really appreciate you coming on the show. I would like to kind of hear, what current projects are you working on now, and what can our listeners expect from you? Any upcoming important dates that you would like to share with our listeners?
Well, I'll be taking my wife on a date later this week. That's important. That's on the schedule. Um, yeah, I mean, I guess two things probably that are feel like a big deal to me. One is I will relaunch my online course, Tribe Writers. That's been a cool thing that a lot of people have really gotten a lot out of. We've had over 1,300 students go through that, and basically I just teach people how to do what I've done in terms of building an audience and then creating a business around that audience, and getting published and doing all of that fun stuff. So that'll come out probably in the next month, and you can find out more about that and get a free lesson at tribewriters.com. And then I'm working on a book that explores some of these ideas that we're talking about. This idea of how you find your life's work. This tension of,
Hmm.
do you choose it or does it choose you? And that's the subject of my next book. And so that'll probably be out in the next year sometime, and you'll be hearing more about me as I'm thinking through this, doing a lot of research. I'll be sharing that on my blog.
Okay, and listeners, just so you know, I will make sure that everything that Jeff talks about and the links to Jeff's work, I'll make sure is up in the show notes at thetravelingcup.com/Jeff Goins. Jeff, could you just go ahead and please share with our listeners where's the best way for them to go ahead and start listening to so that they can join your tribe?
Uh, all my stuff is at goinswriter.com. That's Goins writer.com. And the best way to stay in touch is to just drop your little email in that email newsletter opt-in. You'll get exclusive updates from me and maybe even some free candy.
That's great. And listeners, I absolutely love Jeff's blog. Like I mentioned earlier, not only for the written content, but the pictures and all that is absolutely beautiful. So Jeff, I just want to take this opportunity and just thank you so much for coming on the Traveling Cup podcast. Seriously, you are really helping our listeners change the world, and I really thank you for that. So thanks again for coming on the show, Jeff, and you have a great day.
Thank you, Mark. You too.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I hope that you enjoyed that interview with Jeff Goins. I am literally in awe. Jeff is someone that I truly admire. He is someone that has taken the leap and has really done something amazing with it. I hope you enjoyed what he had to say today. My favorite part is I love how he says, that quote where he talks about if you turn pro on your head, you'll be pro. And he really talks about how if you want to do something, all right, and you want to be the change that you want to see in the world, right? It's you do it, you say it, and you make it happen. And he is a living example of how that works and how it can work for you. So I hope you got a lot out of that. But more importantly, I hope you do something with it and you be the change that you want to see. So head on over to thetravelingcup.com/Jeff Goins for all the show notes. And I look forward to seeing you next time on The Traveling Cup.